Hey, Shalom Akim. First and foremost, and give all praise, call Allah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Rakakwadash, and of course, double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, who through the Spirit tell us all is true, alright? Salutations also out there to the Akim out there on the highways and byways, pushing this truth with all honesty and sincerity. Alright, while waking up the remaining, hopefully elect. Alright. This is 9 miles to DC camp. I came across this, and this is going to be to all you boneheads that still deny that the Northern Kingdom are Israelites. Alright. This is, what do we always say? Alright. I'm going to go to the scriptures here. Because, what did the prophecy say? It said what? These curses, let's scroll on down here to 45. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 45. It says, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Most High Yahweh thy power. You know, according to what? Deuteronomy 28 and 1 and 2. Alright. It says, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee, and they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. They serve as an identifier. Okay. And then we get another one in correlation with that, because some of you still, not, because you're into this black BS. All right. Black, which isn't even legit. All right. It's just a color. Alright, it says, Daniel chapter 9 verse 12 says, and he hath confirmed his words which he spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil, for under the whole heaven hath not been done as hath been done upon Jerusalem. Alright, another one. And the reason I'm doing this is because this right here really pissed me off. Alright, I'm trying to be, hey, alright, keep it clean. Alright. But it's things like this, if you can't get it, you just can't get it. And I'm probably going to go over my time limit, but I please, if I do this, split it up, it's probably going to, well, anyway, let's get to it.
Everything we know about Carmelita Torres is from a few newspaper accounts in 1917. They called her an auburn-haired Amazon, just 17 years old. She led angry women in anti-American rioting and shut down the U.S.-Mexico border. But hidden within her story is something much bigger than a single riot. It's a story about Amazon, just 17 years old. She led angry women in anti-American rioting and shut down the U.S.-Mexico border. But hidden within her story is something much bigger than a single riot.
Now bear in mind, this is 1916, 1917.
About a toxic campaign of disinfection and discrimination. And a U.S. practice that would go on to inspire Nazi scientists.
Keep that in mind. That's important.
Between El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, thousands of people cross back and forth for work and school every day. They line up in Juarez and often wait for hours to get through the U.S. checkpoint. But the border didn't always look like this.
Crossing this border used to be free and unrestricted. People would come and go without a passport. But after 1917, Juarez and El Paso became two separate communities.
It was a turbulent year at the border. The Mexican Revolution was ongoing, and the U.S. was about to enter World War I.
All of a sudden, you have the war hysteria created by World War I. People here in El Paso that are deadly afraid that the Germans are going to attack from Ciudad Juarez.
The fear of invasion brought tensions to the border, while across the U.S., a different movement was gaining strength. The eugenics movement, based on junk science, aimed to create a genetically and morally superior population. That meant stricter controls on immigration, only allowing those deemed fit to enter. On Ellis Island, one of the busiest ports of entry at the time, U.S. health officials were tasked with weeding out immigrants they thought were unfit or disease carriers. And across the country, that process coincided with the stereotyping of Mexicans as inferior and unclean. Dozens of film titles included the word greaser, a derogatory term used to describe Mexicans. This racist sentiment was strong at the U.S.-Mexico border. El Paso's mayor, Tom Lee, had developed an obsession with cleanliness, and it defined his political platform.
This obsession with not only racial purity, but physical purity. He was going to literally clean up El Paso from all these bad elements. And by bad elements, he often meant racially bad elements.
One of Mayor Lee's biggest fears was a disease called typhus, spread by lice. So, under the pretense of sanitary betterment work, he helped lead a campaign to inspect every house in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood. If the inspectors found lice, occupants were forced to take vinegar and kerosene baths, have their heads shaved, and clothing burned. Hundreds of homes were eventually destroyed. Lee also expanded the supposed health measures to include inmates in the El Paso jail.
They had to strip naked, take a bath inside a tub full of kerosene, and on one occasion, it seems somebody lit a match.
27 prisoners, majority Mexican or Mexican American, burned to death in the fire that the newspapers called the jail Holocaust. But despite the tragic fire, Mayor Lee pushed forward with even more aggressive plans.
He sends a telegram, a Western Union telegram, to Rupert Blue, who was the Surgeon General up in Washington, D.C. And basically, well, let me just read it. Hundreds dirty, lousy, destitute Mexicans arriving at El Paso daily will undoubtedly bring and spread typhus unless a quarantine is placed at once.
Keep this
the
bare,
government didn't
in
agree
your
to
brain
a full
housing
quarantine because
unit
evidence
here. Keep that
suggested
in
that
mind.
typhus wasn't a major
Typhus.
threat in the area. But instead, they funded a new disinfection plant at the border in 1916. In this facility, every immigrant considered a second-class citizen had to strip naked.
Here we go.
Their clothes were sent to a large steam dryer and then fumigated with toxic pesticides inside the gas room. An inspector would check each person's body, including private parts, for lice. If they found lice, immigrants would have to shave their head and body hair and bathe in a mix of kerosene and vinegar. Some even had their eyelids checked for things like pink eye, and many had to complete puzzles or simple IQ tests to prove that they were fit for entry. After this process, they'd receive a ticket as proof that they were disinfected, but they would need to go through this every 8 days in order to re-enter the U.S.
So many people didn't
Every 8 days.
about it. They didn't talk about this humiliating process like they.
Now I gotta stop it here because there were several things I asked you to, pay attention to. Alright? This is Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. It says, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Alright? Seems like I've seen this somewhere before. Continuing on.
Kind of internalized it. It's that psychology of shame.
The toxic baths and dehumanizing inspections at the border set the stage for a revolt, led by the 17-year-old maid from Juarez who defied the order to bathe.
Carmelita Torres was, I've compared her to the Rosa Parks of the border. In the morning of January 28th, 1917, there's this electric trolley full of mostly women that are crossing every day. She convinces the majority, if not all, the women in that trolley to just say no and to refuse. They started spontaneous protests.
There are accounts that in addition to the humiliating delousing procedures, for women, there was also sexual humiliation.
There were rumors that, when they entered the plant and then they were told to strip, officers were taking their photos and then posting them in bars. So I can't even imagine the kind of feeling, like the feelings of violation and the feelings of, outrage.
She was called an instigator, a ringleader, but she was just a young woman that was just sick of the injustice, of the humiliation that other women had gone through.
What started with just 200 protesters that morning slowly grew to a crowd of 2,000. Reporters said the scene reminded one of bees swarming. The hands of the feminine mob would claw at the tops of the passing cars. When the American officers tried to disperse the crowd, they were met with bottles, rocks, and insults. Protesters even laid down on the tracks in front of the trolley cars to create a blockade. They were joined by men in what's called the Bath Riots, and they shut down this border for 2 days.
And then all you hear is that the ringleaders are arrested, and a few of the men are publicly executed.
As for Carmelita Torres,
it appears like she was thrown in prison, and as historians, we don't know what happened to her afterwards. We've lost every trace.
the fumigations didn't stop after the riots. In 1917 alone, over 100,000 Mexicans were deloused at the border. That same year, an immigration law made border procedures even more rigid. Immigrants at all points of entry needed to have a passport, take a literacy test, and many would have to pay an $8 head tax. And later that year, the U.S. Public Health Service laid down instructions for border agents.
Something else that should sound familiar, all right? For the Southern Kingdom, what did they, with us, remember you had the 13th, you had the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment, which addressed what? The poll tax. Something, hey, very similar right here, all right?
About who should be kept out of the country.
Imbeciles, idiots, feeble-minded persons, physical defectives, persons afflicted with loathsome or dangerous contagious diseases.
The discriminatory policies at the border resemble
Like I say, what's going on now?
elsewhere in the world.
Uh-oh, here goes.
In
Listen
fact,
carefully.
while researching this, David stumbled upon a detail. The fumigation of Mexican immigrants wasn't just reminiscent of Nazi Germany, it was directly linked to it.
It's not so much that the United States was copying Nazi Germany, it's the opposite. Nazi Germany was copying the United States.
He found that in the 1920s, the U.S. started using Zyklon B, an extremely poisonous acid gas, to fumigate clothing at the border. And in 1937, in a German pest science journal, a scientist called for the use of Zyklon B in Nazi disinfection chambers. He included 2 photos of El Paso's delousing chambers as an example of how effective Zyklon B had been at the U.S. border to kill unwanted pests. The same scientist pushed to use it to disinfect concentration
Gerhard
camps,
Peters.
and eventually it was used in concentrated doses to murder millions of people.
People, rightly so, say you can't compare what happened in Nazi Germany with other parts of the world. And that's true. In terms of Zyklon B, it was used on the border not to intentionally kill Mexican border crossers. But the history of something like the Holocaust doesn't take place in a vacuum.
And there you go.
A few decades after the Bath riots, Mexico started sending men to work on U.S. farms and
Ecclesiastes
railroads
1:9,
as
that's
part
why I
of
read
a
it.
new labor agreement
Nothing
called
happens
the
in a
Bracero
vacuum.
Program. And through the program, the border disinfections continued.
All right, so right there, I'm going to stop it for time's sake. I hope this was edifying to whoever sees it. Just remember, these things, like I said, Ecclesiastes 1:9. Matthew 24th chapter, all right? These things are going to repeat. Luke 17th chapter. So, Second Ezra 6, 15, and 16 chapters. All right, this is coming about again. So with that, call hello Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai by Hashem Kokodash, and of course double honors once again to the apostles of Great Millstone. Salutations to Akim out there on the highways and byways, pushing this truth, all honesty and sincerity. So with that, Shalom Akim.